Hello, this is Movie Thoughts. My name is John Hastings. This is my podcast, and also I'm doing videos now of where I talk about movies and just my random thoughts on movies. It's pretty poorly recorded still. I guess we're a little more high tech now. You can find the fan page. It's on Facebook at Movie Thoughts Podcast, and then I also have my reviews, which are on the Letterboxd site under the username Forager23. And then now trying to get a YouTube channel going under the username Forager23. So that's that. And then the podcast itself is on Anchor in case you're coming to this through YouTube. So today's topic is a bit of a follow-up to the episode from a couple weeks ago where I was talking about the different approaches to movies, or when we think about movies being more theatrical versus more cinematic or photographic. And there's talked a little bit about the bias that some, not all, but like kind of like egghead intellectual cinephiles have against theatricality, and got into this idea that some cinephiles, some hardcore movie buffs watch with this sort of more formalist, essentialist approach to movies, where they may, which is not the way I think most people watch movies, but which can be very rewarding and be a very kind of a rewarding approach, but isn't really the way most people watch movies. And I should actually have said something like this before that episode, which is that the thoughts I'm having about this are really on the amateur level. These topics have been discussed by academics and scholars for years and years and years. There's a whole history of discussion along these lines, and I'm not up to date on that conversation at all. You could probably talk to like a film, a professor of cinema studies right now, and they'd say like, oh, all these topics are much better covered in these papers or in this chapter of a book. Um, so you're getting my thoughts, which are probably redundant, probably not even that sound. And I was really reminded of this because I've actually been rereading one of my a book of Eric Romer's writing that I hadn't read in years and years. I read it last years and years ago, so I was rereading it, and I kind of stumbled over a number of passages or articles that really spoke to some of the topics I was talking about in that episode on theatricality, and he did a much better job discussing it. So I wish I had read those before I had done that episode, so I could have kind of referred to it. But that kind of shows you even the books on my bookshelf I'm not as up on for some of these topics. Having said that, I do think there's some value in just having my thoughts. I've seen a lot of movies. I have read a lot of film history, a lot of film criticism. I have read film theory in the past. I'm not as up on film theory now as I was 20 years ago, but I definitely have at least some dabbling in film theory. And then like I say, I've been thinking about this for years, and so I think there is some value in this kind of informed amateur perspective. That's my hope, at least. I hope at least it's interesting. So in that episode on theatricality, I brought up this idea that there's a normal way people watch movies, and that is they watch the movie and they get involved with the character and the stories, and that's really their way into the movie. They may not notice things that like style or technique or form. And sometimes, film, or if they do, it's very subconscious or subliminal. And sometimes filmmakers will say that's what their goal. They don't want the audience to be noticing these techniques. They want the audience to be just paying attention and engaged with the story and the characters. So that might be a good thing to have this invisible style. You know, and even in popular movies, like movies for a popular audience, where the style is very in your face, the example I was thinking of is like Edward Scissorhands. It's very clear that those stylistic choices are there to directly relate to how the audiences are meant to react to the characters and stories. The stylistic choices are there to put over the characters and story. The style has a supporting role in the audience's experience of those movies, supporting, putting over the story. And I think it does require some practice, kind of cultivating different perspective to go from the opposite direction. And it might be temperamental too, that some people are just more wired that way. Fred Camper, who I mentioned in the prior podcast, is a critic who based on his what he said about his experience of movies, has always kind of been more or less wired that way. I think for a lot of people who come to this perspective, it's after kind of cultivating it, or after not kind of not necessarily kind of coming to it on their own, but we probably do need some sort of temperament there to kind of allow you into that path. But um, so if we think about that normal way, starting with characters and stories, then the other way would be to go in the opposite direction. So you're engaging first with the form and the style, and then maybe using it that as a way to get back to the characters and story, maybe just appreciating on its own. And this is where you get that uh, you kind of get that that kind of difference between, or you get that pushback sometimes from egghead cinephiles against the concept of the well-made movie. So when people are kind of putting down a well-made movie, what I think they mean is that they're saying that the movie might have engaging characters and a story, and it has good production design or whatever, but it doesn't have those other formal elements. It's not interesting at the formal technique level, and really that's the important thing. So you get this occasions where eggheads will, like myself, are often praising movies that don't seem to be good in a normal sense. You kind of recommend them to an audience, a kind of general audience, and they will recoil from them. And then if they say, well, what do you like about the movie? The things you like about the movie are you're explaining solely in terms of form and technique, and you know most people will be like, well, what's the story? And there's like a gap there, there's a bit of uh, experience gap that needs to be crossed, if you're going to get people to kind of to see how you're seeing the movie. I'm thinking of all this because of a recent viewing experience I had that really crystallized some of my thinking on this. And that was the movie A Song Is Born by Howard Hawks. It's not a Howard Hawks movie that many people like, or at least I've never not seen too many good things too many good things said about it. Even Hawks had a terrible experience making the movie. He didn't think it was a good movie. He didn't think it was funny. The only place I've ever seen it being praised was on the A Tourist message board, the A Tourist centric film discussion message board, A Film By. And even there, it wasn't universally praised. There were people who were dissenting about it. Um, I really liked it, and I thought it was really a terrific movie. So, what's the difference between me and then some of these other tourist film critics, film buffs, and versus almost everyone else who's ever seen it, and including Howard Hawks, who have seen it and they think it falls flat? And I think it really depends on, again, this willingness or capacity to let the formal choices lead you into your experience of the movie, and maybe even lead you to an appreciation of the story and the characters, which is to say, for me, from the very first frame, what the movie seemed to be about. And what I mean by that is, in a very a tourist sense of the word, about, meaning kind of what Hawks seems to be interested in doing, what he seems to be interested in playing around with, has to do with an appreciation for how Hawks seems to be seeing how many different ways he can come up with to film these large groups of characters on the screen on a pretty static set. So we've got often up to dozens of characters on the or more than a dozen, between a dozen and like 20 characters on the screen at the same time. It seems like usually there's very few, a couple scenes with just two or three characters, but most of the scenes have like six or seven. So how can you have these big groups of characters on screen and keep the compositions very dynamic, um, uh, very variable from one to the next, and then dynamic within each individual shot? And the uh, he keeps coming up with these different configurations. It keeps the movie, for me, very compelling, very lively, very interesting. It becomes like this kind of beauty in his in the sight of him coming up with these different configurations, and then as the movie goes, they kind of rhyme off each other and play against each other, and you get this I wanted to call it abstract. I guess I don't. I think maybe abstract is the wrong word. I don't know if I could come up with a better word, but this kind of abstract beauty to it. It's kind of the beauty of seeing someone work out this kind of formal problems, these kind of problem, this kind of there's this beauty in his problem solving as he goes through the movie. Um, and then you know once that was really clicking for me, actually led, and I think that might be enough, but I think, you could just say, well, this is a movie about people, about watching what a director can do to solve this problem of how to fit a lot of people onto the screen and make it interesting. I think it actually takes you back the other direction, though, back towards that more normal way into the movie of appreciating the story and the characters, because once you see that he's interested in these, do playing around with these big groups of characters and keeping it dynamic and interesting, you can then see that the more what the story is about has to do with characters from different groups. You've got these egghead music historians or music scholars, and then like working jazz musicians, and different groups coming together to play music with one another, to learn from one another. And it really, Hawks's formal choices really play up the this kind of the story and theme choices that may not be as put over as well from the movie itself, or if you're just paying attention to the characters in the story. It certainly made me more sympathetic to what the movie was doing, and more sympathetic, I think, than if I had not been keyed into those formal things that Hawks was up to. So I think I think myself and the auteurists on the film by are kind of right that I think it's a pretty good movie. um, I think it's has some great stuff in it, and yet I don't think its virtues will be apparent if you don't already share this type of approach or temperament to how to see a movie. I'll give a couple other examples of movies where my appreciation is coming from this, I guess, more form first approach. And I'll go back one to this discussion I had when the Michael Mann's movie Public Enemies came out, and got an email exchange with my friend and former film professor Steve Weinberg, and he really didn't like the movie, and he thought I was weird for liking it, and he said, well, there's no theme to the movie. And I kind of thought theme was all over the movie. And when we talked more about it, what I realized that we were looking at different things to where we were finding the theme. We were really approaching the movie from those opposite directions. I was coming in from that form technique choices first, and he was coming in from the story and character first. And what struck me from the opening of that movie, Public Enemies, was this very strong attention to using individual shots to show these very dramatic reversals. So dramatic reversals of situations and of our understanding of what we're watching. And that really seemed to be the organizing principle of the entire movie. How can you kind of fit as many of these like dramatic reversals within a single shot, and how can you play that out? And for me, that led to an understanding of what for me is kind of the theme of the movie. It seemed to be the theme of the movie, which is the idea that that's kind of that shifting nature of the image and our understanding of situations is comparable to the way our relationships with other people are very contingent and shifting, and not kind of fixed in any absolute sense, but are always sort of movable and relative to each other. And I don't know that I would get to that theme by just looking at, if I just kind of paid attention to just the story and the characters. It really has to do with paying attention to how the story is told and how the characters are presented, that I came to appreciate that as the theme of the movie. And I think it's a pretty good movie. I think it might be a great movie, and or rather, I think it might be a great movie, and then maybe without necessarily being a good movie in the well-made movie sense. And this is this a kind of topic that comes up, you know. So uh, you can think about what makes a great movie and what makes a good movie. So this argument about the well-made movie, I'm going back to. So a well-made movie has kind of compelling characters and a good story and good production design, and that you can say that's a good movie. And then, what is a great movie? Is a great movie simply that plus more of it? Or I think the formalist, tourist, egghead approach might be to say, like, no, greatness is actually a separate category altogether. Um, and you can have a movie that's great and it doesn't necessarily need those kind of things that make something good. Which is to say, to make a movie great, um, you need that kind of formal that formal interest, that formal beauty, that mastery of technique, and you can have that irrespective of whether you have kind of a compelling story or compelling characters. And again, that's a very kind of egghead approach that's not going to be shared by a wide audience. That's not the way a normal person is going to watch a movie. If you can cultivate that approach, I think it is rewarding. I think it's more rewarding, honestly, than the normal approach. But it takes some cultivation and some desire to do so. I'm going to talk briefly just about one more movie along those lines. And that's one of Alfred Hitchcock's late movies, Topaz, which not even Hitchcock fans have much nice to say about it. I think I'm one of the only people I know who really thinks it's again, I think a great movie, although not necessarily a good one based, kind of based on what I was saying about the difference there. And what I really like about it is, what I find compelling about it is Hitchcock had this career where he did some very bold, kind of bold things playing around with narrative point of view. And a couple ones stick out obviously. Rear Window, where everything is just kind of told from Jeff's point of view, and we are not we're in that apartment seeing what he sees. The it's you see how far you can go of making a really rich film, but by limiting yourself in that way. The other big one, Psycho, where we start with feeling this is going to be the movie from the point of view of one character, and then in the middle there's a dramatic change, and it turns out nope, not anymore. And that's a very uh, bold choice, and one that most has not really been picked up on by other filmmakers, either in popular cinema or art house cinema. That idea that you're going to kind of violently or otherwise just kind of switch the kind of point of view character in the middle of a movie is not something other filmmakers have for the most part picked up on as a technique. So Hitchcock was really kind of doing these things with point of view that other people are even now not kind of able to pull off, or is kind of beyond the interest of what other people want to do. The Birds is interesting in this way, is maybe a little bit more subtle than Psycho or Rear Window, but it's not until the birds really start to attack Melanie, kind of I forget how long into the movie, but that we move away from her point of view. The movie's really stuck to her point of view, and then we right after the kind of first time the bird attacks her, we get this kind of God's eye point of view shot, and that's kind of an interesting thing. Topaz continues in this kind of pushing this idea of the point of view, where you get uh, the story is broken down into different point of views, and eventually it does kind of settle into a main character, but it jumps around a lot, and not like a network narrative where you're kind of cross-cutting between different characters as they experience the story in different ways, and you go from A to B and then back to A and then B and then C and then back to A and then C and then B. It's more in chunks, so the movie will pick up a new character's point of view for these sequences and then stick with them, and then discard those characters for the rest of the movie. And that's something that it seems obvious as a way to organize a movie or tell a story, but like other people weren't picking up on it. And I think what I like about Topaz, I think almost all of those individual kind of sequences are really compelling in their own right. I think the problem with Topaz, why a lot of people don't like it or normal audiences don't like it, is that it's hard to maybe get into from that character story point of view, because you really kind of have to appreciate it in these kind of discrete chunks, and then afterwards kind of say like, oh, I see how that all fits together. Whereas moment to moment, it's more confusing maybe about why you're seeing it or where it's going. Anyways, that's what I have to say about those three movies and about this idea in general. I think I'd like to talk more about tourism and how tourism has shaped my own thinking about movies. So that's an upcoming episode I hope to do. And then hoping to do some more, get to some of the other episodes that I had been planning to do before my had to put the show on a little bit of a hiatus during more work and home obligations. But anyways, that's all I have for today. So take care.